Video is Unit 4, plants through, or bacteria through plants, and this particular video is learning targets 6 through 8 on fungi. Fungi are eukaryotic heterotrophs with cell walls, meaning that they are different from eukaryotic autotrophs with cell walls that would be plants. So these are autotrophic, or eukaryotic autotrophs with cell walls are plants. Eukaryotic heterotrophs, again, fungi. Fungal cell walls are composed of a carbohydrate called chitin, and they either serve as decomposers or parasites in their ecosystems. So a lot different than plants. Plants are producers in their ecosystems. The average fungi looks like this. They are composed of these little threads called hyphae. Sometimes you'll see it called hypha or hyphae, depending on whether it's plural or singular. That would be hyphae. And then all of the hyphae, all of the threads combined, are called a mycelium. And so you can see here in this picture, this would be an example of a mycelium. And if we had a microscope, we could zoom way in here and see these individual threads called hyphae, the individual cells. This gives the fungi lots of surface area to absorb nutrients from the surroundings. It's trying to get out into this dead organism as quickly as possible to get all the nutrients out of it and to decompose it. And so they are very efficient at what they do because they are able to take over organisms very quickly. When we see a fungi, what we are actually seeing is the fruiting body. And the fruiting body is the portion of the fungus that would be the reproductive portion of the fungus. Most of the organism, again, lives beneath the soil, and this is where the organism is breaking down the dead thing or whatever, and the fruiting body is above the ground or above the rest of the organism. You can see here there are several fruiting bodies here, these little blue things. A mushroom is an example of a fruiting body. But there can be several fruiting bodies for one particular mycelium. The fungal life cycle looks like this. The fungal life cycle, the fungus spends a lot of its life doing asexual reproduction, and that means that these individual cells, these hyphae strands, go through mitosis, and they are actually haploid in their arrangement. They only have half the number of chromosomes that are available. So a couple of new words here: haploid and diploid. A diploid organism, or an organism that is 2N, has pairs of chromosomes. Their chromosomes are organized in pairs. For instance, our cells all have 46 chromosomes in them, or 23 pairs. And so a haploid human cell would only have 23 cells. This would be like a sperm cell or an egg cell. We normally think of haploid cells as being like your sex cells, and your diploid cells are everything else. Well, the fungus exists in this haploid state, or this 1N state, whereas every cell only has a half copy of its chromosomes. And then when those cells combine, that would be sexual reproduction. But most of the fungal life cycle exists in this haploid state. This allows them to reproduce very quickly and, again, fill out that dead organism as quickly as possible. These haploids aren't male or female like we would think, but they are either plus or minus. And so some cells are plus and some cells are minus. And then when a plus fuses with a minus cell, that is what creates a diploid zygote. And this is made from the process called fertilization, which is essentially one haploid cell combining with another haploid cell to make this diploid zygote. In order to make the haploid cells, there's a process called meiosis, which makes the haploid cell. So the plus joins with the minus, creates this diploid zygote, and then the diploid zygote goes through meiosis in order to get back to the haploid state and to continue to grow in that state, in the haploid state. Several words here: plasmogamy, karyogamy, things that we're not going to be concerned about. But what I want you to see is that meiosis creates spores, and those spores, which are haploid, spores is another word, spores, which we've talked about, or we will talk more about when we get to plants, but these spores are haploid, and they can grow into this haploid organism. Now, a few different kinds of fungi. Fungi are classified according to their sexually reproduction structure. And so we're going to look at 4 different kinds. One is zygomycota. They have a structure called the zygosporangium. This is just their spore making structure, the haploid making structure. The example of this is mold. This is some mold on strawberries. It's not sugar or ice. That is dirty stuff. Anyway, zygomycota. A little too fast there. Another example is ascomycota, and they have a structure called the ascus, and this is their sexual reproductive structure. The word ascus literally means like sac, and you can see these little cups here. They look like mushrooms. They're not. The things that are in your yard they're like little bags of spores. When you kick them, this black cloud comes up. You can roll them with a mower. Those are examples of ascomycota. Yeast are another example of this grouping of ascomycota. The one that we are most familiar with is basidiomycota. Basidium means club, and the basidium is the spore producing structure here. Basidium. They look like little clubs, that's why they're called that, but we know them as mushrooms. These fungi are particularly important decomposers in ecosystems, and these structures, these little caps up here on the top, produce the spores, and that spreads out the organism, which is actually under the earth. This happens to be one of the most poisonous fungi on the planet. This is the death cap mushroom. And then lastly is the group Deuteromycota. They are called the imperfect fungi. They have no known means of sexual reproduction, thus they're imperfect. It doesn't mean there isn't one, it's just it's currently unknown. Penicillin is a great example of this. This is like green bread mold. You can see this is obviously moldy bread here, and it's green. So this would be an example of penicillin, or a Deuteromycota. Now, the ecological impact of fungi, of course, they're decomposers, which we mentioned. This tree has fallen in the woods, and without fungi, the tree would lay there indefinitely. But the fungi return those individual pieces of that organism back to the soil so they can be reabsorbed by other organisms. Some fungi are pathogens. This is obviously not a real photo, I don't guess, but athlete's foot is an example of a pathogen. Wheat rust, corn smut, a couple of others pathogens in plants, ringworm, and some other like dandruff. These are all pathogens that are fungal related, and there are other much worse. And then lastly, of course, I mentioned this, penicillin is used as medicine. Very important in the discovery of antibiotics and how they worked. And so penicillin's extremely important to our civilization. Here's a picture of a war fighting infection with this penicillin rather than a bottle of whiskey really helped things and saved soldiers' lives. And even though this young lad is not too happy about his penicillin shot, it is a beneficial thing. Antibiotics have saved lives and increased life expectancies all over the world.